There's a confession. It's taking me forever to become a good boss. Well, I'm not the one to judge that, I guess. It's my team. But that's at least what I'm finally told. I'm saying finally because it for sure wasn't like that about 2 decades ago. And I will never forget one particular story. As I was passing by my assistant's office, stopped at her desk and curiously asked her, "What's that wallpaper all about?" And she said to me, "That little cute thing you're seeing there on the PC, that's me, and that's how I feel working for you." I mean, you know what I mean. I'm pretty convinced had she been asked to write a book way back in 1992, the title would have been Surrounded by Martin. Oh, idiots. It could have been kind of the same. And that's all about today. Today is all about people types at the workplace, and I couldn't think of two people better suited to point them out than today's guest. So let's start the M&M Show. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world, our World Business Forum audience, and all our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there, including his latest New York Times bestseller, The Earned Life, Lose Regret and Choose Fulfillment. And I have to tell you, it's an absolutely amazing book. But what's even more amazing is Marshall, which is a dear friend of mine. And I have to say, if someone has changed my life, do you know what, Marshall? It has been you. I have to admit it. Welcome once again.
Thank you so much to my wonderful comrade, Martin. Martin Lindstrom, a wonderful human being. He is the most interesting human being I've ever met in my life. So if you get a chance to meet him, he is the world's most interesting. Time magazine said he was one of the 100 most influential people in the world. I think he's entered into the galactic contest very soon. He is a world's number one authority on branding. He's published some wonderful books, including biology, small data, which I also love, and the Ministry of Common Sense, which is why he and I are working together on a new project. One of my CEOs says, excessive bureaucracy. I said, this is the guy to talk to. He's always pitching in to help out. He does good deeds, and he's a good guy. So always happy to work with my comrade. Yay.
Thank you, Marshall. And now all of you out there know exactly why I like Marshall so much. I mean, if I have a problem with self-confidence and self-esteem, I just go on the M&M Show for 5 minutes, then it's all solved, right? Now, by the way, if you have any questions or comments, just post them here. Just tell us who you are and where you are. And if you, by the way, like this show, don't forget to press the like, the follow, or the subscribe button. Now, Marshall, we have a Swedish person on the show. To my memory, this is only the second person in history of the M&M Show which is Swedish. Tell me more about him.
Oh, he's a wonderful person. He's wonderful. We've got Thomas Erikson on the show. He is one of the world's best-selling authors. And his huge kickoff book, which started out was, the book about surrounded by idiots. He's talked about surrounded by bad bosses, setbacks, narcissists. He's trained over 4,900 executives, 10,000 leaders. Books have been translated in 40 languages. And as I said, 5 million copies sold. And just a great guy. And I love the premise of his work, really getting people to understand each other. And I was just thinking about writing a new book, which actually was it's slightly different, but related to what he's doing. So I just love it. I'm very, very happy that he's joining us today. And I just love the concept of what he's doing.
Welcome, Thomas, to our show.
Bye. Thank you so much. I'm turning religious here. Close to. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, to begin with, I am sure that coming up with this title, you might have been told you were an idiot. yourself for coming up with the title. Surrounded by idiots. Probably the publisher said, "You're the idiot." Tell us just a little bit of the story behind that, how you came up with the title, where you came up with the premise, and the reception when you first got started.
Exactly, that's the story in itself, I guess. Well, the point, the thing is, I mean, surrounded by idiots, who haven't felt like that from time to time? We've all been surrounded by idiots, and usually, I mean, there's not so many idiots in the world, but they move around a lot, so you sort of run into them all the time. And I had a couple of really bad, terrible experiences in my working life. And so I started to write books. I started to write crime novels, to be honest. And so I got this idea, maybe I should write about behaviors, day-to-day psychology, personality. So I went to my publisher and said, I have this fantastic idea. It's going to be about personalities. It's going to be about different behaviors. It's going to be about this and that. And it's going to be called Surrounded by Idiots. And they looked at me and they said, it's the stupidest idea we've ever heard. Firstly, it's a dumb title. It's an ugly cover. It's my own design. The front page, yeah, there it is. It's an ugly cover, and it's a really dumb idea because nobody's interested. Go back to whatever you were doing before. And I was never good at taking advice, so they actually called me the idiot. They say, this is one of your worst ideas so far. Well, I had to self-power. I've never been good at taking good advice. I wrote it anyway, so while commuting and doing management consulting. So it took me a year on a train, basically 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. And then I put it together and I published it myself and drove around with boxes of it in my car and forced it upon my clients. And so I'm happy to see a lot of people are taking the book and the message to them now. I'm really grateful for that, to be honest.
Remarkable, Thomas. I know that there's a lot of research going into your work. It's not just something you're pulling out of a sleeve. And you talk to interesting sources to really get a grip around these type of personalities. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I haven't invented anything and I haven't sort of discovered anything new. What I use is this 4x2 matrix. It's actually called the disc profile. That's been around for decades, so nothing new there. We added the colors on top of it to make it more, easier to wrap your head around in a pedagogical way. Red, yellow, green, blue, because then you can understand red and yellow behavior. It's easier to remember than an high D over an I with a low C, or an ENTJ personality. Sorry, ENTF. No, IT. What is it now? So red and yellow. It's easier. So my aim has always been to, make things easy to digest, I guess. And then you have to use, I have to use a sort of a language that people get attracted to. So therefore I sort of take it down to and some people criticize me for it, saying this is not scientific enough. I know that. You can go for a PhD in psychology. That's absolutely fine, but I didn't have the time. I don't think most people had the time. So read a book and be interested, get drawn into the topic itself. That's my aim, so to speak. Make people curious, learning about other people and about themselves, obviously.
It's interesting because as an executive coach, one of the biggest challenges I have is people always think, why can't they be like me? Why aren't they like me? And it's so puzzling for people. And I'm sure the further out you are on any curve, the harder it is. It's not that they're bad or evil people who believe that. It's just puzzling to them. How do you really convince people to, wait a minute, just because people are different doesn't mean they're worse or wrong, and get the people, see people through a different lens that's more inclusive?
Definitely so. I mean, this is going to sound like a cliche, but, most behaviors are okay, obviously, but not all the time. We understand that. We understand I can't behave the same way all the time, and well, some people do, of course, but we have to use more imagination, I think. Use more imagination, be a little bit more inclusive, be a little bit more generous. Why did he talk to me like that? Can I ask him 3 questions to understand his message a little bit more? And again, I mean, to understand those who can't be understood, the message in the book is obvious. Of course, there is not so many idiots out there, very, very few. And the problem is also, I mean, like myself, when I was a young manager, I found the idiot in the mirror more than once. Terrible experience. Sometimes it ended really, really bad. And I mean, we're all the idiot in somebody's story, right? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I love that. My former friend who died, Roosevelt Thomas, he always talked about a lot of related to what you're saying, the importance of learning to accept others. And he used a famous American basketball team, the Chicago Bulls, and their coach was Phil Jackson. And Dennis Rodman was a member of the team. He used to dye his hair all different colors and rainbows. And the coach was asking him, well, how do you deal with that? He said, he's leading rebounds. I don't really care what color his hair is, right? Color it any way you want to, Dennis. Knock yourself out. He said, a guy great scores, he lead the league in rebounds. And who cares? So I think part of it, like you said, is just getting people to accept that different is not inherently bad, that we have different preferences and it's okay. What do you think, Martin?
Well, I think this is a perfect segue to a little statement I want to come with. Because, okay, coming up, we all know sensitive souls. Perhaps you are one of them, but did you know that they've shown to be instrumental in building powerful cultures? How many people can one today categorize as a sensitive soul in a workplace? Well, I'll tell you one thing, the answer will surprise you. And that, by the way, leads me to our second guest on today's show. Our next guest is an amazing individual, and may I say, very sensitive. She actually makes a living out of uplifting moments and making people go through these emotional moments. And out of that process, she published the book Sensitive, The Power of Feeling in a World That Doesn't, which took, by the way, the UK by storm. She's a poet and makes radio documentaries for BBC Radio. She's worked in prisons and hospitals and thrive in a company with all her fellow creatives. Welcome, Hannah J. Walker.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And Thomas, it's so interesting to hear you talk about your book, like fascinating. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I tell you, I think I said this off show that you have an ability to connect with people within seconds, and all of you watching right now will know exactly what I'm talking about within a couple of seconds, because you are a sensitive soul, and I had no idea about how many people at the workplace label themselves as being sensitive. First of all, help me with the definition, and second, how many people are we talking about?
So Dr. Elaine Aron, she wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Person, which came out in about 1996. And her book is all about how to figure out if you are in fact a highly sensitive person. And you can go onto her website and there's like a self-referencing test that you can take on there. And she breaks it down into an acronym, which she breaks down as being DOES, which means depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional intensity, responsiveness and empathy, and sensitive to subtleties. Her book is wonderful. And as research does, research is always, as we know, evolving. And now it's much more likely to be phrased that sensitivity is a sort of curve that we're all on, and that highly sensitive people, which makes up 1/5 of the population apparently, are at one end of that curve, and that sensitivity is something which is in all of us, like it's an innate trait which is in all of us. It helps us navigate the world. It's sort of, in both in terms of your sensory sensitivities and your interpersonal sensitivities and your emotional sensitivities, but everywhere is somewhere on that scale. But this 1/5 of the population sits at one end of that scale.
Seriously, 1/5. I mean, I'm going to say something now which is completely politically incorrect, but I'm just thinking navigating that with that in mind makes me also sensitive, because I think the issue is that we forget about it in this hardcore environment we increasingly live in, right? So when you came out with that number, and were people surprised?
Well, she came up with the number, and so I can't vouch for how surprised she must have been. I know that it kind of met a lot of interesting press headlines when it came out, so I imagine there was mixed views to do with that, as there often is with anything that hits the news in that way. I think it's now viewed as being quite a conservative estimate, and that it may well be slightly more than 1/5. So I know that there's very mixed responses from people like that about their own sensitivity, which is often to do with your nurture environment and what story you've been given about yourself throughout the education system and your parenting. So some people will in fact be highly sensitive, but will have built a story for themselves that they are like the toughest of the pack, and so will never be seen to cry. And like if you mention anything around sensitivity, they will couch it in very different terms. So what became very clear to me when I was doing the research for the book is people kept talking about there being a sort of ecosystem, like as if diversity of soil types within environments, that we need that combination in a similar kind of way to how Thomas is talking in his book, that we need that sort of that variance, because that is a balanced system. But what we have with highly sensitive people a lot of the time, because we have such a cultural story that being sensitive is such a problem, particularly within the workplace, that we have this proportion of the population who mask their own nature, often are not operating to the maximum of their potential within important environments. And so that's sort of where the problem with sensitivity sits, really. And what I really wanted to try and do with my book, the reason why I wrote it really was, I'm very sensitive, and I have a daughter who's very much got some of the key attributes of my character, and I was slightly alarmed at first to realize that, because I'd like a better, not that I've had a bad experience, but I'd like a better personal narrative for her than I've had my whole life. And also, I think that sensitivity is more useful than the story it currently has. I think it's about fleshing out that story. We're not very good at having a narrative understanding. Like you go, what's sensitivity for? And people go, I don't know, it's just nice. And that's not a good enough story to persuade, for instance, like a manager to like put a pay point next to it. Like that's just not, it's not solid enough. It doesn't have enough weight and depth to it. So that was what I was really interested in. I was like, well, can sensitivity have a better story? And so what is that? I think Thomas had his finger on it.
It's fascinating. Sorry for interrupting, but is this sensitivity, I don't know, is it called a condition, or this at least what you're talking, is it increasing in society?
That's a really interesting question. I actually don't know. I imagine that the pandemic might have had a really interesting impact upon a lot of people's articulation about their own emotional worlds. I think a lot of people had a lot of employers know, a lot of people had mental health crises and sort of personal revelation moments. I think there's been a sort of shift. I also think that as generations continue, one thing that stories change and different traits become more acceptable. So for instance, in the book, I interviewed my mum, who is very highly sensitive, and she talked a lot about her parenting and how culturally it was really not acceptable when her parents were young to, you just wouldn't have the same conversations around emotions and sensitivity. She said something like, it was more like, chin up, get the job done. She wasn't sure how much of that was to do with like British work ethic, or how much of that was to do with like the moment in history that they were living in. So I think definitely time-wise, stories are shifting. And I think the pandemic has shifted things. And one of the questions which I asked in the book, which I really care about, is what stories and skills are going to serve us well for the future. I'm really fascinated by that. And I started to really think of, you can really easily just think of sensitivity as a trait. But I realized that sort of excludes a proportion of the population from utilizing that as a skill and something they have access to, because they may go, well, what about me? What if I don't sit in that, 1/5 of the population? Like, that's very excluding. And so I was very interested or curious to know, like, what happens if you start phrasing it as a skill? That's something we all have the capacity to increase our use of and use better. But in order to do that, it has to have a better story, because otherwise everyone goes, but why? Why should I do that?
I have a theory, Thomas, going back to your question. this is no scientific knowledge, it's just a guess. Historically, leaders, and people ask me, are leaders more bullies than ever? This is a nonsense question. Leaders are so much nicer than they've ever been in history. The pyramids were not built by people who went to sensitivity training. They're built by people with whips. So if you look at the history of the world, leaders have become increasingly sensitive. They manage knowledge workers, and they can't just tell them what to do and how to do it. Now, back to my theory and Thomas's question, I think, and maybe it goes back to Hannah's point too, people who are sensitive now can come out of the closet.
Mm.
I'm not sure that there are more or less of them, but in the past, you really didn't criticize your boss. You didn't act sensitive because you were taught not to, like the British stiff upper lip thing. But also you never talked back. You didn't talk back, period. Whereas in the old days, and Martin and I worked some hospitals. In the old days, the old doctors would scream and yell at the interns and swear at them and call them names and all that. It was perfectly acceptable. You can't do that anymore.
Mm.
Cannot do that. I'm dealing with the hospital right now. We're at the top in the world. I got to talk to 3 doctors and basically say that world is done.
Mm.
And yeah, maybe your previous doctor did it to you, and that father did it to them, and theirs did it to them. That's the old. You can't do it anymore. So I think, Hannah, I never thought about it, but I'm not. And Thomas, I don't answer your question because I don't know. But I think whether it is or isn't not more prevalent, I don't know. But I do think it's more out of the closet.
Yes.
I really think sensitivity used to be in the closet.
And there's also
It's about acceptance.
Oh, sorry. There's also
It's about acceptance, Ron.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. The internet.
I know you first.
There's a theory in Elaine Aron's book that she puts forward that there's a really ancient partnership role within society, which is a lot less visible and a very different kind of understanding of leadership and power. In that, and lots of people don't agree with this, but it's a theory that is out there. She argues that there were warrior kings, just like you described, Marshall, sort of whipping the whip to get the pyramids built, and then there were sages who were in a sort of observing role, who would say, like, I've noticed that when you tax the people, they're not very happy, and they although you're hitting them, like they're not working as hard. And it would be like piecing together that observation. That's a terrible example, but you just to say, you see what I mean, and it's about looping information back in the other way, so that warrior king role can sort of and I resent that that's gendered, but obviously that's another time and place as well, but that partnership working is incredibly useful. And that is one, she makes the case that that's what that partnership working is one of the roles that started to fall down, that's really, really useful in our workplaces. So it's not about saying, hey, get the power system out of the way that's there. It's about looping in. You're a specialist in this, you must know much more about this than I do, looping in those different types of thinking into those leadership roles. So yeah, she makes that case, the sort of partnership working and observation role.
Marshall, tell me, you have been coaching how many people over the years? 2,000, 3,000, something like that?
A bunch.
Great. How many would you say of those leaders would be categorized as being sensitive, falling under that 20% as Hannah's talking about?
I would say, I've never thought about it as an exact answer, so I want to ponder the question. I would say probably slightly less than what she said, but not some, but certainly not half.
And do you see a correlation between them being a good leader because they're sensitive, or do you see some patterns there? Because as you indicated yourself, leaders increasingly showing vulnerabilities, and it's part of what
Right.
is asked, what they're asked to do. Do you see these correlations?
Well, I'm going to go back to Thomas's point. I think a good leader is someone who can relate to people who are different than himself or herself, who can relate to people who are sensitive and relate to people who are less sensitive. And the fact that the leader's preference is not really the driving factor, that the leader is not there for the leader is there for the people being led. And that the good leader is a person who, back to Hannah's point, is aware enough to respect people who are different, or Thomas's point, respect people who are different. And so I'd say a good leader is a person who is flexible enough to understand that and to realize people are different. I think Hannah's point, though, more and more people, the empathy is seen as more important in the workplace than ever. And leaders get worse feedback than ever, yet they're better than ever because the expectations have changed so much. And again, I think, Hannah, this is strictly a guess, but my guess is that the sensitives have come out of the closet and in the past would not complain about bad treatment, and now they will.
It's such a good point. Okay, coming up, a study by Tasha Uris, a former guest on the Eminem Show, by the way, shows that 95% of us think we have good self-awareness. The true answer will, however, shock you. Now, before we come to the answer on that, Thomas, how on earth does sensitive people navigate you idiots?
That is, of course, the right question. I mean, let's put the idiot part aside a little bit. And again, the idiots are the ones we don't understand. So therefore, we're all idiots. Let's just agree on that. When it comes to highly sensitive people, I think Marshall is also onto something because, I mean, again, a leader is somebody who understands all kinds of individuals, all kinds of personalities, all kinds of, well, whatever you want to call it. And it's really hard to understand everyone. That's why so many leaders aren't leaders at all. They're managers or bosses or maybe worse even. I think when you're highly sensitive, as I have come to understand it, and I'm certainly not the expert on that topic, that would be you, Hannah, but I can see, depends a little bit about the organization, about, sounds like a cliche, but I mean, in Sweden, it's been for quite a few decades okay to talk about emotions at work, to talk about, I don't feel good about this, I don't like this, I have a trouble with my boss. It's been okay in Sweden to bring this up, bring this on the table and talk about things that are kind of complicated. And as you said, Marshall, there's less and less places in the world where you can whip your staff and shout and yell at them. There are still some of those places left, but not very many. I don't know what the real answer is. I believe that we need to understand more about it. If the number is every fifth of all kind of employees everywhere and all people all over the place, then I guess we have highly sensitive managers as well. So everybody should be interested in sort of solving how to navigate, how to help them navigate and how to help us navigate, because it's probably the same way if you are in an extroverted organization and you lead, you have a boss that is kind of introverted or the other way around. You need to understand each other. I don't think you can do it by yourself, regardless if you are in that pool or if you're in another pool. You have to sort of bring it up. You have to communicate about it. And it's hard. It requires a lot of hard work, definitely. You need to take it seriously, probably. And a lot of people don't.
You got an excellent point, Thomas. One of the most common phrases I use when I coach people is that, wouldn't the world be wonderful if everyone were just like you? Because always they keep saying, well, when I was, or I would do this, or I would do that, or blah, 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 blah. I say, yeah, well, that's the big, and Martin, I haven't shared this with you. I've uncovered one of the deeper problems of all of humanity. Almost every social problem gets back to one cause. All the bad decisions, one cause. Nobody asked me before they made the decision.
True.
They'd just done that. These problems wouldn't exist right now. So, back to your point, getting out of this is my preference, therefore it is right, as opposed to this is the way I might tend to be, but I don't have to be all the time, number one. And number two, back to Hannah's point, maybe I'm not characteristically defining myself as sensitive. I need to understand sensitive people because they are a large part of the population. And in the old days, they would put up with crap they won't put up with now. So I think, which I think is a pretty healthy trend. But as Thomas said, a challenge. This stuff is not easy. It's hard.
It's really hard. And talking about, you mentioned Tasha Urich's work, and I've seen that study. I'm not going to spoil anything, but it is fascinating because self-awareness is the key to social competence, I would say. If you're going to, or social skills, let's call it better in English. If you're going to deal with people, be an excellent communicator or an excellent leader, you have to have social skills. And that is based on self-awareness. That is just the case. But social skills are, it's like with humor, everybody thinks they have it. But we know that's not the case, right?
Absolutely.
Some
And when you
people
talk
do,
about
some don't.
when you
Say,
talk
Martin,
about self-awareness, I just want to reveal the numbers. So, of course, 95% think they have this self-awareness, while the number is almost the opposite. In fact, the majority of us do not have that at all. Here we go. Talk about being self-obsessed. Do you know what? I think it's time for us to run the BCG minute. And we've been searching around to find a creative person, because in creativity, of course, you put your emotions on the table for display, and that's a very fine balance. So Jonathan Holloway is the BCG minute for this M&M show. Let's run the tape.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Holloway. I'm formerly the Artistic Director and Chief Executive of the Melbourne International Arts Festival and the Perth International Arts Festivals in Australia, and a Theatre Director with the Royal National Theatre. And now I advise cities and major organisations in creativity and giant thinking. My question for this eminent panel is, how can organisations make sure that they get the most out of the highly sensitive people in their workforce?
Hannah, I don't know why, but I have a feeling of this one is landing on your desk.
Yes, I do have some thoughts on that. I've got a chapter in my book called Working It, all about sensitivity in the workplace. And there's a few things which are very obvious, but very powerful. So I'm sure many people sitting on this panel here already use these in their workplace practices. But just very simple things like when you are in a position whereby you need to ask your team their perspective on something, that like asking everybody in a meeting room on the spot is not the best way to get everybody's opinion on that. And so very simply saying, like, you can give me your thoughts now, or you can give me your thoughts in an email immediately following this meeting, which is such a simple thing. Or very simple things with language, like, can everyone, instead of saying, can everyone tell me what they think, saying, can everyone tell me what they think or feel about this? Because someone may have a feeling-based response to that, as in, like, I feel uncomfy with this. And somebody else may have I suppose this links to your research, Thomas, somebody else may have a more information-based assessment that they think about that. So just like opening up the invitations for those different kinds of like entry points to participate within that environment. Also, things like the workplace environment, which I think is we've all seen has changed during the pandemic, that for a lot of people, and in particular for highly sensitive people, open plan working is very counterproductive, very overly stimulated, and drawn into the lives and conversations of people around them. So thinking about, if possible, thinking about what workplace environment is right, if that's an option within a building, what workplace situation is right for who and why and how. Also inviting different types of personalities into leadership teams, which you guys are really confident already is happening. And I want to believe that's really true. I think it may be partially true, or maybe something that's in the process of change, but I think there's still quite a lot of hurdles there to get over in terms of diversifying the types of thinking types that we actually have at tables of power. So I think just very basically in recruitment, thinking, is it the person who most confidently gives me the answer, or is it the person who has the skill set that they're expressing about their own character and how they tackle a problem. Also, finally, and this is an interesting one. It came out of a lady who I interviewed who looks after people who experience secondary trauma through working in the police or social services when they've been involved in very traumatic situations, and they get empathy fatigue after long periods of time, but high performance is consistent and needs to be kept going. And so she was talking about how people stay in those jobs, what skills are needed, what narrative is needed. And she said to sort of try to encourage very basic things. For example, somebody says, I need a meeting. You say you needed to ask your boss for a meeting. if you feel you're aware that the other people outside the glass room that you're in can hear, just saying to your boss, would you mind if we took a walk outside and had this meeting? It would make me feel a lot more comfortable. Or is it okay if I just close the blind? It's really hot in here and bright, and that's making me feel really uncomfortable. So just like really basic sensory things, as well as psychological things, which just help get like dial down any like unhelpful oversensitivity in the workplace, because there is such a thing as a sensitivity being unhelpful in the workplace in some environments. So yeah, those are some of the key ones. I could go on, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
You know, Thomas, and I know it's pretty hard to publish many books on this topic to condense it to just one suggestion. I'm going to ask you anyway. The broader topic, not just dealing with someone who's sensitive, but dealing with someone who's different. You've studied personality types, and if you had just a couple of suggestions to help, because it's hard to understand people who are different, and to help the leaders who are listening to us, a couple of ideas to help them be effective in dealing not just with people who may be more sensitive than they are, but in general, just people who are different than they are.
I think we have to go back to where you recruit the managers today. I mean, usually still in 2022, when you recruit a new manager for some department, or it's usually one of the best experts in whatever field. It could be an engineer, it could be an accountant, could be your financial advisor, but the man or the woman who's the best expert or specialist in one way or another tends to be promoted, which means they are not there because of the leadership skills. It sounds easy to say, but we have to consider what it actually means. But as you said, Marshall, regardless of what kind of difference we are dealing with, if it's highly sensitive people or if it's this kind of people who are super task-oriented and goal-focused and sort of harsh on everybody else, as long as they are different than the majority, you have to do something, you have to deal with them, you have to sort of work yourself, you have to find a way you make them work in the organization. And then you have to be interested in people, you have to be interested in how to communicate, and you can't be the best people's person if you are an expert on IT systems, because you're an expert on IT systems. There's nothing wrong with being an expert on IT systems, or lions in a zoo, or dogs, or whatever. But if you're going to deal with people, you need to be good dealing with people. And very few people are sort of naturals in that aspect. There are some of them. I mean, I have met, of all people that I have met, trained, coached in some sort of staff leading positions, big or small, I would say 10% has been good. 1% excellent, 20% so bad they shouldn't have the job at all, and 70% sort of kind of just float around because they didn't get away when the question pops. And so I don't know, but most people they don't have these skills regardless of what kind of difference, and it's really, really difficult. In my first managing position at the age of 24, I was certainly the idiot. And if I had met a highly sensitive person back then, which I probably did, Hannah, I'm sure I did, I would probably have cracked some stupid jokes about it, which is, of course, not very flattering, but I totally admit I was lacking a lot of things. I'm still a work in progress, I understand that. But if you're not interested in human beings, why are you in that chair in the first place?
I really agree with everything you've just said, Thomas, and I think that's where I land in my book as well, basically, that difference between somebody who's the expert in the thing versus somebody who's able to work in a team with others is really problematic for workplaces, and it's something that a lot of workplaces individually find themselves facing again and again. And one of the things I talk about in the book is like, well, how has that happened? Like going back to source, and that's to do with how we educate. We educate for siloed achievement because we test and test and test. And actually, that's brilliant and necessary. But what's so useful, as you all know, in the workplace is your capacities to work with other people. And that gets educated out of us the further we get through the education system. So that I think is a really interesting challenge for education, to supply the workplace with those people who are able to understand. It's that human reading of like, what's your motive here? How do we best cooperate? Like, how do we collaborate? What's the nature of this? What does the customer need? What does the internal team need? What does the marketing need to say? It's all that sort of infrastructure of human relationships that some people might have innately, but it's certainly not fostered by the systems that we live in.
So everyone, I guess this is the moment where we should be running a commercial promoting both of the books. You could buy 2 of them for the price of 1. 2 different souls, 2 different topics, yet the conclusion seems to be remarkably similar. Idiots and sensitive. Who would have thought that, right? Marshall, what's your reflections right now on this whole thing?
Oh, I could be here all day just asking these people questions. So I found it just totally fascinating. And, I'd like to do more follow-up and maybe interviewing people who are higher on that sensitivity scale to understand, is the issue there are more of them, or they're more out of the closet, or I do think it's a much more important issue either way. I think Thomas's work has become increasingly important because we're in a diverse workplace right now. And its cultural diversity is very, very important, not just the national diversity that used to be there. And you've worked in Thomas worked culturally diverse organizations. It's very important to understand this stuff. So I think we've all got, as both of Hannah and Thomas said, we got a ways to go to learn this stuff, which is good. Give me something to do the next few years.
Exactly. As Thomas is saying, most behaviors are okay, just not all the time. And I think Thomas also said that sometimes he look himself in the mirror and that's where he finds the idiots. Well, that's exactly what I did when I, many years ago, joined into this. One would be left wondering, how come we don't learn about this whole topic in school as it is so important? As what exactly Hannah is saying, that 1/5 now is categorized as the sensitive souls. And as Anna is also saying, it's part of the ecosystem to have a diversity of individual emotional characters, was creating this nice ecosystem and a nice balance. And what I love about this whole topic is, of course, that the best leaders, and we heard that both from Marshall but also from Thomas, the best leaders are the ones which are willing to show vulnerabilities and be sensitive. I think Thomas said that it's 1% which are excellent, 20% are great, and 20% of those leaders out there should be fired on the spot. They are, and I'm quoting you now, Thomas, idiots. What a note to stop on. I just want to say, on behalf of Marshall and I, thank you so much for joining us on the M&M show. And by the way, check out martinlindstrom.com/mm/ for show notes and hundreds of free videos from our many shows and free tools and books and all this stuff. So just scan the QR code, which is on the screen right now, and hopefully you will see some of the past shows, or see Thomas and Hannah once again with all their amazing inputs. Now, I want to wrap by saying on the 4th of October, 2022, we'll have Gary Hamel and Roger Martin on our show. And I don't need to tell you, they are 2 iconic folks. Roger Martin was ranked as the #1 business thinker in the world according to Thinkers 50. Gary Hamel has been up there as well. Both of them are pretty remarkable because they have in many ways defined how the future of organization is looking like. So, Marshall, thank you. Thanks to all our guests. It was amazing. And I just want to say we'll be back again the 4th of October at 12 noon Eastern. Take care. Bye for now.
Every day is a new challenge, right? Is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more.
about leadership as a mindset.
We do work that matters for people who care.
We live in the age of the idea.